Alright, this is the third lecture from Chapter 1, entitled Environmental Ethics and Sustainability. This lecture will address the following topics: an overview of environmental ethics and ethical worldviews, a discussion of in comparison of the preservation ethic, conservation ethic, and land ethic, introduction to environmental justice, discussion of the ecological footprints of different countries, introduction to the 2005 Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report, and discussion of the concepts of sustainability and sustainable development. We're talking about ethics. First thing we have to remember is that our ethics, our outlook, our study of good and bad, or right or wrong, or the set of moral principles or values that we hold, are determined or based upon our culture and our worldview. So our culture is our knowledge, beliefs, values, and learned ways of life shared by a group of people. And our worldview is a person's or group's beliefs about the meaning, purpose, operation, and essence of the world. Culture and worldview affect perception of the environment and environmental problems, and hence affect your environmental ethic. Environmental ethics is the study of ethical questions regarding human interactions with the environment. So we take those ethical standards that philosophers have come up with, and we apply those to our relationships between humans and the natural world. It's a topic of applied ethics and is essentially about environmental responsibility. These are the kind of questions that we might ask in environmental ethics. Should the present generation conserve resources for future generations? Are humans justified in driving other species to extinction? Is it okay to destroy a forest to create jobs for people? Is it okay for some communities to be exposed to more pollution than others? There are three primary theories of moral responsibility regarding the environment, and we call these the three ethical worldviews. And they are the anthropocentric worldview, the biocentric worldview, and the ecocentric worldview. When we think about the anthropocentric worldview, the word anthropocentric means human-centered. So this is a situation in which our relationship to the environment is based only on whether or not it benefits humans. Okay, so in this case we measure costs and benefits of actions solely according to their human impact. So if we're preserving some resources only for human needs. Biocentric worldview, ethical worldview, ascribes values to actions, entities, or properties on the basis of their effects on all living things, or on the integrity of the biotic realm in general. Remember, biotic means living things. So it takes it beyond just the human-based. And of course, there are some, subtleties to that. Some people who subscribe to this biocentric worldview would be talking about every organism, every living thing. Some would be more focused on animals. Some would be focused on all organisms, but still may try to deal with pest organisms and control their numbers, etc. So there's some subtlety there. The last of the three that we're discussing here is called ecocentric, and ecocentrism considers actions in terms of their benefit or harm on the integrity of the whole ecological system. And this is kind of based on some work by Aldo Leopold, who we'll talk about in a few minutes here. Okay, I want to talk about these three different ethics. They interrelate to some degree as well, and I don't think that you have to only follow one. You can take elements of each of them as you come up with your own environmental ethic. The preservation ethic, we often think of John Muir as you can see here pictured with President Roosevelt at Yosemite, and he was an advocate for the preservation of untouched wilderness, a voice for restraint during a period of rapid change and westward expansion. So the urbanization and ruralization that was going on in the U.S. Um, spurred Muir to try to slow things down as far as saving some places that would never be developed. The preservation ethic considers nature special in itself. Nature has it, so it's a view that nature has intrinsic value or inherent worth, or nature is sacred. Muir believed that nature mirrors divinity, nourishes humanity, and vivifies the spirit. When we think of the conservation ethic, we often think of Gifford Pinchot and President Theodore Roosevelt. Conservation is the idea of using natural resources, but using them wisely for the greatest good, for the greatest number, for the longest time. So not using them all up, thinking about future generations, thinking about the future a little bit and planning. Gifford Pinchot was the chief conservation officer, or advisor, excuse me, for President Theodore Roosevelt, and was the first chief of the Forest Service. Together with Muir, who we just talked about, and others, Roosevelt and Pinchot established the framework of the National Forest, Park, and Wildlife Refuge System, which we'll talk about in future chapters. The land ethic, we usually think of Aldo Leopold, author and conservationist. One is probably his most famous book is the Sand County Almanac. Aldo Leopold urged people to view themselves as part of nature. So he, again, to the changes he was seeing, just like Muir, to the landscape, he wrote about a new way or a new way to view the relationship between humankind and the earth. And in the Sand County Almanac, he has an essay called The Land Ethic. And here's a quote from that. "A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us." Aldo Leopold believed that healthy ecological systems depend on protecting all the parts, and that humans should view themselves as part of the land, right? That the land and humans are part of the same ecological community. And so we are obligated to treat the land ethically. Another quote by Aldo Leopold from Sand County Almanac. "Wilderness is the raw material out of which man has hammered the artifact called civilization. No living man will see again the long grass prairie, where a sea of prairie flowers lapped at the stirrups of the pioneer. No living man will see again the virgin pineries of the lake states, or the flatwoods of the coastal plain, or the giant hardwoods." In 1982, a proposed PCB landfill in Warren County, North Carolina was protested by residents of an African American community that was located close to the planned facility. Out of that came the idea of environmental justice. And the basic idea here is that poor people and minorities suffer more than their fair share of environmental problems, and that we need to apply a standard of environmental fairness broadly across all sectors of society. In 1998, environmental justice was defined by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policy. The end of the chapter, the concepts of sustainability and our world's future and sustainable development come in. When we think about sustainability, the word sustain, right, is to keep going, right? If something is sustained, it just keeps on ringing on, right? And so sustainability is the idea of living within our planet's means such that the earth and its resources can sustain us and the rest of Earth's living things for the foreseeable future. It's about looking ahead. It's very similar to the idea of the seventh generation, thinking 7 generations ahead and planning for that when you're making a decision. It's a concept of whether or not the present generation, has an obligation to conserve resources for future generations. Okay? This is an ethical question, and it's at the core of the notion of sustainability. We can revisit the idea of ecological footprints. Now we can take an ecological footprint for an individual, or for a family, or for a city, or for our country, or for the whole world. Here are some examples of average per capita ecological footprints for different countries. And you can see that nations vary in their per capita footprints, per person footprints. This is based on consumption, right? And more developed countries are going to have higher levels of consumption. Now that doesn't have to be the case. I mean, consumption still will stay high, but the footprint doesn't have to be so large. It's about how we do things, right? How we get those resources, how we recycle those resources, what energy sources we use to make those resources. So those footprints can be adjusted. But this time, we can see that there are large discrepancies between the two. And we also know that humans are placing a great burden on Earth's ecosystems, right? And with the combination of population and consumption, right, we are having trouble with keeping up enough resources, growing enough food, treating the waste properly, etc. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment was completed by over 2,000 of the world's leading environmental scientists in 2005. It's the most comprehensive scientific assessment of the world's current ecological status. And it not only looks at the problems, it documents the problems, but also outlines solutions. So, while it makes it clear that our degradation of the world's environmental systems is having negative impact on all of us, it also states that most of these trends can be turned around, although it requires political will and a lot of work. We'll come back to this document later on in class. Sustainable solutions abound right now. We're coming up with more and more ideas about how to do things. And one of the concepts that we can think about is sustainable development. Again, this is very similar to the idea of sustainability, right? It's about using resources to satisfy current needs without compromising future availability of resources. Okay? So it's again thinking ahead. When we think about sustainability, the first thing we need to know is what are the problems, and from those problems we can come up with solutions. And we know that some of the solutions involve the following: trying to diversify our energy, looking towards a renewable energy system, trying to exploit those those natural resources that are perpetual, like solar energy or wind energy. We need to think about how we grow food, and we've learned a lot about how to do it in a more sustainable way. Um, we need to conserve soil so it's renewable. We need to be careful with how much water we use, and we need to find a way to grow agriculture without polluting the land and water. We need to reduce our pollution, and we need to protect habitat so that we can protect species, so that we can protect ourselves. And we need to mimic nature and recycle. Some conclusions from this chapter. Environmental science helps us understand our relationship with the environment and informs our attempts to solve and prevent problems. So, first of all, we identify problems, and we can then devise solutions. Identifying and discussing problems are the first steps to developing solutions. Again, no problems, no solutions. All right, we're almost ready to start chapter 2 here, and we'll keep going when we talk a little bit about environmental economics and environmental policy. Thank you.